So some showers arriving into the north and northwest of Scotland, Northern Ireland, but clear spells elsewhere. However, a bit more cloud around and slightly milder air with us, so a less cool night, 15-16 in the south. I think single figures still, though, for Scotland and Northern Ireland. That's where the best of the sunshine will be first thing on Wednesday morning. And also there'll be some sunny spells for Wales, southwest England, a lot of cloud elsewhere. And the early rainfall in the east turns to showers. Widely, actually, we'll see an afternoon of sunny spells and showers. But in between the showers, there will be some warmth in the sun. 23 Celsius in the south, 18 to 20 in the north. The showers heaviest in the east. Thursday sees a return to sunny spells and showers for many, but I think a better chance of drier and brighter interludes at times. Likewise, Friday, a day of sunny spells and showers before some more persistent rain arrives from the northwest later, and that will be with us this weekend.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it is 6 p.m. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. So, coming up, the government has given the green light to more bricklayers, carpenters and plasterers to come to the UK. Businesses will be able to hire foreign workers on 80% the going rate. Is this pragmatism? We have labour shortages, or is it yet another betrayal of the Brexit vote? Then the illegal migration bill has passed after a battle with the Lords, but protests continue in Portland Port over the Bibby Stockholm barge set to house 506 single men. With protests cropping up across the country, does the government understand the very palpable anger out there? And Suella Braverman says the risk of terrorism is rising, with Islamist terror still the primary domestic terrorist threat. Would you support further counter-terrorism laws? We'll have that debate. And finally, the 45-year-old woman jailed for aborting her baby at around 34 weeks has been released from prison after winning a Court of Appeal bid to reduce her sentence. Are we forgetting here the life of the unborn child? And we have the BBC Director General Tim Davie under the spotlight over the way the broadcaster dealt with allegations against presenter Hugh Edwards. Its annual report shows 500,000 more people have opted out of paying the licence fee this year. Is it game over for the Beeb? As ever, please do get in touch. Let me know what you think about all of that. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. But first, let's get the latest news headlines with Polly.
Emily, thank you. Our top story this hour concerns the BBC. The Director General has been telling a parliamentary committee today that staff at his corporation are confident in the broadcaster's whistle-blowing processes. The House of Lords Communications and Digital Committee asked Tim Davie why the organisation didn't take allegations against its most highly paid news presenter more seriously and much sooner. The BBC boss confirmed that the organisation has been in touch with the complainant who alleged Hugh Edwards paid a young person for explicit images, but since the allegations were published in The Sun. Tim Davie says the investigation could take a while to reach its conclusion.
It's difficult to give you a precise time on that. The reason is because you have to go through that diligently, assess the information. There's also duty of care concerns within that. So on that one specifically, because I'm not in control of all the variables, that could take weeks or it could take a couple of months depending on, or even longer depending on what we get and managing the individuals involved flawlessly. My main priority is to be fair, make sure we get all the information into that process and act judiciously.
GB News understands 450 people have crossed the English Channel today in 9 small boats. The news comes as the first group of asylum seekers will be moved to a migrant barge, which is currently docked in Portland, in Dorset, and will be full of migrants next week. The Bibby Stockholm, as it's known, will be used to house single male asylum seekers as part of the government's plan to reduce the cost of housing migrants in hotels. Local residents have been calling for the barge to be moved elsewhere and say that local protesters at the scene aren't even from the local area. The Secretary for Energy Security and Net Zero, Grant Shapps, says the key priority is to control the UK's.
It's incredibly important that government has control over who comes to the country. Last night, we passed a milestone by finally defeating Labour, both in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, who have voted dozens and dozens of times against a bill designed to stop the small boats. We are trying to make sure that we can control our borders, and that is the difference between a Conservative government who want to control our borders and a Labour government who simply have no answer.
The Home Secretary has said today that the risk of a terror attack in the UK is on the rise. Speaking in Westminster, Suella Braverman has identified Islamist terrorism as the primary UK domestic threat. Ms Braverman also confirmed Northern Ireland-related terrorism remains a significant threat, with some dissident groups continuing to plan attacks. The Home Secretary also warned of Russia, Iran and China, referring to Russia as the most pressing national security concern.
Terrorist attacks are becoming increasingly unpredictable, making them harder to detect and investigate. Today, unlike in previous years, terrorist movements are increasingly fragmented and disparate, and there are emerging threats from the extreme right and from abroad. Despite the prevalence of lower sophistication attacks in the UK, the threat today is more diverse, dynamic and complex.
The former Manchester United footballer Ryan Giggs says he's relieved at being cleared of domestic violence allegations after charges against him were dropped. The 49-year-old was due to stand trial for a second time, accused of controlling or coercive behaviour towards his ex-girlfriend. But lawyers withdrew the prosecution. Ryan Giggs denies the offences, and his previous trial ended last August, with the jury failing to reach a verdict. Donald Trump says he expects to be arrested by an inquiry into the Capitol riot and challenging the 2020 election results. The former US president says he's been informed he's the target of the special counsel investigation. Donald Trump also claims he's been sent a letter saying he has 4 days to report to the grand jury and argued that it almost always means an arrest and indictment. The special counsel hasn't commented on that yet. But staying in the United States, the Defence Secretary has confirmed a US soldier crossed the border into North Korea without authorization. US officials say he's now being held by North Korea. Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin says his department is now closely monitoring the situation and they're working to notify the soldier's next of kin. He added he is concerned about the welfare of the soldier. The individual was taking part in a tour of the Joint Security Area and he crossed the military demarcation line separating the two Koreas. The EU is sending firefighting planes to Greece as the country attempts to tackle wildfires due to an extreme summer heatwave being felt across southern Europe. British holiday destinations such as Spain, Italy and Greece and parts of the Balkans are being hit with very high temperatures. The Greek Prime Minister is cutting short his trip to Brussels to oversee government activity as the wildfires rage. Smoke from the fires are so widespread they can be seen from space. The first British passports bearing the title of King Charles III will start being issued this week. The post-Brexit blue travel documents will say His Britannic Majesty. It's the first time since 1952 that they've been issued under that title. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app, this is GB News.
Thank you, Polly. Yes, welcome to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. Now, joining me until 7 is my wonderful panel. I have Ben Habib, who is the CEO of the First Property Group and a member of Reform Party, and I have Alan Miller, the co-founder of Together Campaign Group. So you're already getting in touch thick and fast about this abortion ruling, about essentially this woman who had an abortion at about 32 to 34 weeks, a very late-term abortion, has been released from prison with a suspended sentence. We'll be getting to that later on in the show, but please do keep your views coming in. But firstly, I want to, and you can get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com or at gbnews on Twitter. But firstly, the Home Office has made a decision to temporarily relax visa rules to enable more overseas builders and the like to come to Britain to work. That means bricklayers, roofers, carpenters, plasterers are all welcome after construction workers were deemed to be in short supply in the UK. This comes, of course, just weeks after net migration was recorded at record levels. So there's quite a lot to get stuck into here. I've had a look at the list of shortage occupations, and it seems to be a recruitment website, Alan. We've got shortages in absolutely everything by the looks of it, from scientists to artists to ballet dancers to choreographers to welding and now construction workers. Do you think when people voted for Brexit, they thought that the government would continue using migration to, well, solve our economic woes, be it labour shortages or anything else?
Yeah, well, I think that, first and foremost, the vote for Brexit was one of the most important democratic votes, and those that have tried to challenge it have been anti-democratic. I also think that this is indicative of the problem we've got with this government and all opposition, actually, that they don't have any ambition about what is really needed in terms of economic development, wealth creation and prosperity. We could have a whole new generation of builders, engineers, investment in science, investment in development. We need millions of new houses. We've got a terrible situation where young people can't afford them, and yet it seems incapable about working with the private sector and laying the foundation for those things. And instead, it wants to re-engage with the importing of cheap labour. It's completely not the right approach. And I really think that it sort of reflects a bit of the bureaucratic and broken Britain approach.
I think so too. It's not what people voted for, is it, at all? And the government seems to be ignoring it again. It wasn't too long ago that Philip Hammond went on the airwaves to say that in order to bring down inflation, we need more migrants in order to make, well, jobs, make recruitment more competitive, so therefore wages are more competitive, and therefore wages go down, ergo you have less inflation. So this is a policy choice, a very obvious, clear policy choice, to have more and more migration to fill these gaps and to potentially reduce wages. I didn't know, Ben, and I'm sure you did know this because you're very in the know, but I didn't know that the shortage occupation list, which is what these construction workers have now been added to, enables employers to hire foreign staff on salaries at 80% the going rate. So presumably a lot of businesses will choose to hire from abroad first before even looking at British candidates now.
Of course, because you've got a cheaper source of cheap labour, haven't you? And this is the problem with people like Philip Hammond. They see economic prosperity through one lens alone, and that is whether GDP is going up or going down. And, of course, if you're ever expanding the population, you get the false sucker that GDP is growing. But really what you're doing is creating a Ponzi scheme, which eventually comes back to, you know, whack you round the head when you cease to grow through that immigration process. Immigration only works to grow GDP for as long as you go on growing the population. The minute you stop, you face all the problems that Alan identified, which is a workforce that is incapable of delivering for the British nation what the British people need. And we've had this, by the way, for decades. This is not a new debate. Government has dealt with this ever since Tony Blair came to power. His approach to dealing with the shortage of workers in the United Kingdom was to open the floodgates to immigration.
Absolutely.
And as you rightly said, it's so nice to be on a panel, if I may say so, Alan, with a fellow Brexiteer. Because normally the person sitting opposite me is sort of anti the whole thing.
I'll play the Remainer.
Don't play the Remainer. But we didn't vote for that. You know, what we voted for was domestic prosperity. At the heart of Brexit, that's what it's all about. And domestic prosperity comes from educating the workforce, having a vision for the British economy that turns on using British workers first, not giving advantages to employers to take on foreign workers. And I've got nothing against... It's not a xenophobic comment. It's just that if you're a British citizen, it should mean something. It should entitle you and it should enable you to get jobs ahead of people who aren't British.
Yeah, I think most people would agree with that, and that was a huge part of the Brexit vote. Alan, at the same time as we are looking to recruit more and more people from abroad, not just bricklayers, but all of these different occupations, we have, according to statistics from the ONS, 5.2 million people on out-of-work benefits. Now, of course, that encompasses people who are seriously unwell, but clearly 5.2 million people in some cities in this country, you can have nearly 20% of people not working. The sums don't add up, do they? It's just lazy from the government.
I think we've got a number of problems here. On the one hand, there's a situation where we don't pay enough wages. So we don't pay enough wages because we don't make enough profits, because we don't make enough wealth, because we don't allow zombie companies to fail. We prop up zombie companies. Actually, the relative wage growth in the last 3 decades has been nominal and not good in equivalent, even if you look at Europe as partners, particularly Germany and elsewhere. We should be having much more dynamic investment, R&D. We should allow companies to fail, but then have retraining programmes. This is about approach and ambition.
That's interesting, because when people say, let companies fail, you know, people are horrended by the idea that you would allow a company to fail, or that it deserves to fail if it's not good enough. But that's how we get innovation, isn't it? One business model fails, another pops up that's better, or the same people come up with a different business model that's better.
Indeed, and then so you have much more innovation, but then also we've got a problem, which is if you look at the benefits and you look at pay and you look at people's situation, some people make calculations and they're better off doing that than working in certain situations. Now, work should be about all sorts of things, but it should absolutely be able to pay you. And in a modern industrial economy like ours, we should be in a position where all of our workers are earning great money. Companies are doing really well. In the 70s in America, on the Ford workshop, people were getting great money. People had 1 or 2 cars in America, blue collar as well as middle class. They were getting swimming pools. The whole aspiration towards doing well is now suffocated by limits, and also we've got this culture as well, which has become endemic, and we need to transform it. But to do that, we've got to engage and inspire the public. We've got to have some good leadership, and that's about wealth creation. It's a dirty word now. People want limits and restrictions with net zero.
And I think it feeds into the debate that we've been having this week over degrees, the worth of university degrees, whether there are Mickey Mouse degrees. The Prime Minister certainly thinks there are that need to be cut back on. But lots of children, teenagers going off to university who may well have been better off doing some of these manual trades.
Which pay very, very well.
They do
now.
if you work hard.
You can make a lot of money. But, you know, Alan makes a really good point. The labour market is broken. The gap between what you can get on benefits and the sort of median wage in the United Kingdom is so close. And I'm not talking about the lower paid workers. I'm talking about the median wage is so close to what you can get on universal credit that, frankly, you might as well sit at home and watch Netflix. And that, for me, by the way, is a much bigger problem than the massive debt that the country is carrying. Because if you can't get people into work, you can't grow the economy. If you can't grow the economy, you can never pay off your debt. So when Rishi Sunak talks about growing the economy and reducing debt but controlling inflation, he's actually at 6s and 7s with himself, because his approach to controlling inflation is killing the economy. He's doing more of what got this country into the problems it's currently facing.
They seem to have been, Jeremy Hunt and the Prime Minister seem to have very much, well, fallen for the idea that you need to have almost a recession in order to bring down inflation. You need to have less growth. But I'm going to segue very smoothly into illegal migration, because, of course, big story of today is that controversial barge that is set to accommodate 506 single men who are seeking asylum, having travelled over here by the Channel on a dinghy, and this barge has arrived in Dorset. So this has triggered protests. Well, the people have arrived in Dorset, I believe. This has triggered mass protest from locals. They're very fearful over the impact the new arrivals will have on the town's community. We know that the government needs somewhere to put these people, Alan, but we're also seeing just how much anger there is out there. And I do wonder if the government understands just how palpable it is, how people are actually furious about being forced to accommodate people who they didn't ask to arrive.
Well, you see, you have to unpick this as well, because there's a number of problems at the same time. I don't think the government, although it's got some intention to try and address things, I don't think it is actually engaged with the public and understands the public fully. I don't think the opposition does either. I think we've got a number of technocrats that say things but don't actually do action. And we've got a problem that's broken with the Home Office, with processing, with control of our borders and with intention. You could have a very big discussion about migration, and often dynamic countries like America, for instance, have migration and they continue to create wealth. The issue is all sorts of barbs are thrown when people make this discussion. They say you're racist or whatever. You don't get down to the nitty-gritty. I know Portland quite well. I spend a lot of time in that area in Dorset. I've got friends. I know people who've got companies and practice there. It's small community. And we should remember our coastal communities and our fishing communities, they have been left behind in many ways in terms of Britain. And they're very concerned about the idea, some people, of particularly males. We're not talking about all families coming to an area. The bigger question is, how are we going to get control of things? That's the question. And then have a democratic discussion about the kind of numbers we'd want and the kind of society we want.
But we don't want anyone, do we, Alan, entering the country illegally? No one. I mean, that just has to stop. We had Grant Shapps on the news a second ago saying this fantastic bill which is going to give us control of our borders. Well, he's not telling the truth, is he? Because it's not a bill about controlling borders. We don't need a bill to control our borders. We need political will to control our borders. What this bill does, well, what this act does, because it's now an act, ostensibly is allow the Secretary of State, obliges the Secretary of State to detain and deport people who enter the country illegally. That is not border control. That is dealing with the problem once it's landed on our shores.
Yes, but Ben, there is no appetite among, well, our political establishment anyway, to turn back the boats.
No, but he's got to stop.
Helping us, are they?
No, well, the French are awful, but that's why we should challenge the French. Let's have it out. You know, he mustn't talk about border control and then advocate a deportation policy. And I'm going to just tell you, I'm going to put on the illegal migration bill will not work.
Well, you heard it here first, it will not work. I like to be a little bit more optimistic. I think it's definitely a step in the right direction, but it's quite extraordinary that we have today seen 450 migrants cross the Channel. That's according to our Home and Security editor here at GB News. 450. This barge would only house 500. So we really are, as soon as we filled up one barge, we'll have, you know, the same again arrive the next day, particularly over these summer months. We really need to get a grip on this. I do worry that we're going to see, well, protests increase, the number of protests increase, that civil unrest increase, because people aren't happy with this. They feel taken advantage of. But anyway, we'll get to your views in just one moment. But coming up, risk of terrorism is rising, says the Home Secretary, as the government has launched its updated counter-terrorism strategy. Do you feel safe in the UK? Should we have more counter-terrorism laws?
Earlier on GB News Radio.
Well, I am joined now by the Conservative MP Marco Longhi. Marco, thank you very much for entering the fray. Are you on a little bit of a sticky wicket here, whereby
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Alan Miller, the co-founder of the Together campaign group. Now, you've been getting in touch with me about the government's decision to make it easier for foreign workers, particularly construction workers, who have been added to the shortage occupation list, which is about as long as my arm. Something is going very, very wrong indeed when it comes to the management of our economy. Perhaps it's too managed. Maybe that's the issue. Graham says the gap in unskilled labour needs to be plugged by the bone idle on benefits. Strong stuff. Forcing those into work solves the labour problem and cuts our welfare bill. I think part of the problem is sometimes that people don't feel that work pays enough, which I'm sure Ben would say we need to cut taxes to make it even more desirable.
We do have to work. We do.
We do indeed. And Alex says the only reason we need to import more bricklayers is to build houses because we have a population explosion caused by mass immigration. It's nuts. Well, there is that. It is a bit of a cycle, isn't it? You need people to build the houses and then you need more houses for the people who've arrived. And they say this is a temporary visas, but I do wonder whether they will be temporary. Dave says, make no mistakes, the Tories are exactly the same on the importation of cheap labour as the Labour Party. The only difference is the reason, namely that the Tories are in hock to big business who prefer the status quo as it's cheaper and easier than the alternative of training British people up. Yes, I think the Labour Party and the Conservative Party have different ideological reasons for wanting to have mass migration, but they seem to both want it, or at least it's just the lazy option, the easy option to try and solve economic problems. But as Ben said, GDP on paper looks good, but actually per capita not so good. Right, moving on. Terrorism. The government has launched its updated counter-terrorism strategy. The risk from terrorism is rising, according to the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. She's been warning of threats from Russia, Islamic State, Al-Qaeda. When we hear that the threat is rising, Alan, when it comes to terrorism, there are often calls to, well, raise the alert level, of course, but then also to come down harder, perhaps surveillance, policies to crack down. What's your view?
I think that intelligence is best done quietly, robustly. Often many of the things we don't seem to be able to do in the previous conversation in a really rigorous fashion. And instead, my concerns with this and the report Suella's done today are manifold. One is that there's a discussion about how generally online, and you mentioned surveillance and curtailment, is being promoted, it seems to me. There's a discussion about pathways into end-to-end encryption, a discussion about cryptocurrencies. We've seen things like the online safety bill. We know that the more legal measures, because there's a lack of political will to do things, so instead they pass ever more regulations, like around protests. When there's enough laws to prevent people to do it now, you need the will and the commitment. And Suella Braverman herself says that whilst we're seeing there's a decrease in threats from things like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, thankfully, and we saw the public be very brave, actually, when we saw some of those attacks, and they should be recognised. I am very concerned, a bit like the war on terror, that we reorganise society, and we also keep telling those who would do things to us where our fears and concerns are. At the conference today, she's also got people from hospitality and the nighttime industries. There's ever more security measures there being promoted around the terror thing.
One of your primary concerns is the impact on civil liberties, on our freedoms, on our day-to-day lives that can be impacted by that crackdown on terror, that war on terror, whatever you want to call it. Ben, do you think there's a link between this conversation and what we were talking about just now, about our porous borders?
Absolutely.
Do you worry that illegal migration, the fact that we don't process people crossing the channel very quickly, undocumented people, we don't know whether people may have bad intentions when they arrive in this country, and we've seen it play out on our streets?
Absolutely. If you've got 500 people coming into the country each day or more, about whom you know nothing, coming from far-flung parts of the earth who have value systems and religions and beliefs that are not compatible with ours, there's bound to be a threat from terrorism increasing. And I think it was Nigel on his show revealed photographs of French beaches with young men making Badri 313 signs, and then similar kind of looking men making Badri 313 signs in London. Badri 313 being the Taliban's sort of elite fighting force. And people can look it up. You know, and if Badri 313 are making their way into the United Kingdom because we've got a porous channel, well, we have a lot to answer for, and Grant Shapps and people who talk about border control need to start getting a grip.
But where does freedom of expression, freedom of association come into this? I think the vast, vast majority of people in this country do not want the likes of Anjem Choudhury, for example, who I believe is in trouble yet again today. We don't want people like that being able to spout forth their hatred for the West and Islamist ideals. But in your view, if you're pro-civil liberties, should they be allowed to?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything should be allowed to be discussed.
So you think you could preach on the streets of London for an Islamic takeover of the United Kingdom?
There's already laws in place if you're advocating violence. It's free speech, legal free speech, which is about ideas and engaging with them. The freest societies have to be free, you have to have that as a first principle. One thing that we could do much more of that it seems is not palatable is to be encouraging and championing what are British values, Enlightenment values, in education, in our institutions. Instead, we've got all sorts of things like EDI and ESG. We've got a disdain for the history of Britain, for the principles of the Enlightenment, for values like freedom of speech and expression. We're told that that's offensive and people should be cancelled.
I think that is such a good point that you make there, that perhaps if the West was more confident in its values and said, you know what, we think our society is pretty brilliant and anyone who's lucky enough to be born here or move here is, well, lucky, then we'd stand in a much more strong position and perhaps people wouldn't buy into this ridiculous ideology such as Islamism, and perhaps people wouldn't become far-right terrorists.
I mean, we're not even neutral on the subject of our values, our heritage and our culture. We are absolutely negative on it. You know, we talk about white privilege. The church teaches white privilege. We brandish Winston Churchill, a national hero, as a white supremacist. The St Paul's Cathedral did that the other day. You know, if the Church of England is meant to represent traditional English values, it's not doing a very good job because it's going about trashing the very foundations of what it means to be, well, English in the case of the Church of England.
There is that discussion to be had over whether you can have mass immigration of people from very different cultures without standing up for the culture that they are entering. You can't have both at the same time. I'll just say on the Anjem Choudhury, because I did mention Anjem Choudhury, yes, he has been arrested on suspicion of a terror offence. He is, of course, the notorious hate preacher. He's been arrested as part of a police investigation into suspected terrorism offences. I'm not sure how much more we know about that, but he, of course, has been in trouble many, many, many times. A lot of people would like to see him behind bars for life, or at least they did. Oh, I'm so sorry. We'll come back to that, and we'll come back to your views at home as well, because you've been getting in touch about the Islamist terror risk as well. I must say also that far-right terrorism is on the rise as well. But coming up, a woman who was jailed for carrying out a late abortion will be released from prison. Is that right?
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's been a damp day once again across many central areas. The rain, though, does ease overnight with clear spells emerging, but there will be further showers arriving on Wednesday. We've had a feature move through during Tuesday. That's pulling away into the North Sea at the moment and taking its rain with it, although it will take a while for eastern parts of the UK to be clear of rain and showers. Elsewhere, a lot of cloud remaining, but the clearest skies will be across Scotland and Northern Ireland, albeit with a few showers into the northwest, and temperatures where we get the clear skies dipping into the low double figures, mid to high single figures. A milder night to come, though, in the south, 15 or 16 Celsius as we wake up on Wednesday. And still a lot of cloud around for eastern and central England, East Wales, and some showers. But more widely, into the afternoon, we're going to see a mix of sunny spells and showers. The heaviest downpours will be across eastern England, central and eastern Scotland. The driest weather will be towards Wales and the southwest, 22, possibly 23 Celsius in the south, 18, 19 for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Fast forward to Thursday, and it's a bright start for many, a cool start to the day. But quite quickly we'll see the cloud build and we'll see showers developing once again. This time the heaviest downpours will be across central areas. A good chance of avoiding showers in some places and staying dry. Fewer showers on Friday before wetter weather arrives for the weekend.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
On GB News Radio.
And we have a media star in the studio with us, retail star.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess I've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. With me this hour is Alan Miller and Ben Habib. Thank you very much indeed. So we're going to move on straight to our next discussion point. A woman jailed for illegally obtaining abortion tablets to end her pregnancy during lockdown will be released from prison after the Court of Appeal reduced her sentence. She was originally handed a 28-month sentence, if you remember, back in June, but this would be reduced to a 14-month suspended sentence. Now, I think this is deeply controversial, Ben. 32 to 34 weeks was when she illegally obtained the pills to have this late-term abortion. What is your view on the decision from the Court of Appeal?
Well, at least it is a court of appeal. It's not a probationary body that's made a decision over the judicial process. But I can't see, leaving aside the debate on the correct, whether abortion should be allowed at all and what the maximum pregnancy, how many weeks pregnant you can be before you cease to be able to abort a child. Leaving aside that emotive debate, I can't see the grounds on which the appeal judge reached this decision. It's not like there are any mental health issues cited. And it seems curious to me that one of the judges said this is more about the need to be compassionate than to punish. And, prima facie, if 24 weeks is the limit, which it is, and a child is illegally aborted after 24 weeks, that is technically murder, isn't it?
That is a crime.
Yeah, that is a crime. And so I'm struggling to come to terms, just from a legal perspective, I'm struggling to come to terms with how they could have reached this decision.
Well, it seems to me, now, one of the judges said that this woman, this 45-year-old, had an exceptionally strong mitigation in this case. It says that the case calls for compassion, not punishment, and no useful purpose is served by detaining Miss Foster in custody. That's what Dame Victoria Sharp said. So this is very much about feelings, isn't it, Alan? We should feel compassion for this woman who, in my view, has murdered an unborn child at such a late stage that it is, I'm sorry, but it should be a crime.
So I think the thing about these things, when they're really on the edges of things, they really encapsulate the most intense feelings, and as they should. And I think that, this law that has been utilised is from 1861, a Victorian law, the Crime Against the Persons Act, which was mitigated somewhat in the 67 Abortion Act, but not this particular clause. And many people who are campaigning from the point of view of the rights of women to control her own body, if that's your perspective, never went the full way to argue that, because they didn't want to have the difficult arguments with people who may think that you should never do it. And there was a kind of fudge in the middle. And this has highlighted the thing. I think a few things you could say about this. One thing you can say is that crime and punishment for society, in terms of what it means. Well, I think this woman, Carla Foster, has been punished significantly, both from the point of view of her own experience. I have no understanding about why someone chooses at 33 weeks to do something like this, but she's a mother of 3. She hasn't seen the 3 children.
I accept all that, and it is deeply tragic, and I agree with the judge
and
that this
what
is
purpose
deeply
does
tragic.
it serve society to have her continually locked up? But I think the judge also the first judge made a very important comment, which is when people in the medical establishment otherwise are criticising this, they should get involved to change the law if they don't like it. And I think therein lies the point, that we need to have a big discussion in society about this. For some people are now campaigning to abolish this as a law. Others will feel very strongly against it. And we need to robustly discuss it, not name call, but listen to one another and argue. And then it should be incumbent on us to make a decision with the majority and see where that lands.
It's a very difficult one, Ben. Well, actually, I don't think it's that difficult. I think she committed a crime, and had that baby been born and she decided to kill it at 34 weeks, it would have been murder. I'm not sure, as a woman, that I see that much of a difference.
No, I mean, 34 weeks is virtually term, isn't it?
Yes, and many, many babies have been born at that stage.
Yeah, and earlier. And I think if there's a viable child, it passes the common sense test, doesn't it, that this is a murder. And I can't see the compassionate grounds on which you would release the mother on a suspended sentence. I can't see it.
There's people that are not being arrested. There are people not getting arrested for burglaries, for attacks, for all sorts of things. People who do rape and murder, and we're seeing the kind of lack of sentencing.
That doesn't justify this.
I'm not doing a whataboutery, but I'm also saying this. There's lots of. You'd have to make that argument right across the board, with your argument about the term. I think the thing is, in the end, some people decide it's about the right of a woman to choose over her own body, and it is very late, and there is a discussion, and there is that really critical one, because at any point we use technology or we do something to make a decision, it has an impact on what you would call potential life. And I think that this extreme example is a tricky one because they're always, when you use extreme and then make a legalistic, this is really a moral argument and it's a political one. And I think the decision one makes is, do you fall on the side of saying, I believe that it should be as soon as possible and late as necessary. Some people think it should never happen at all, of course, right? And it should be in the ability of a woman to decide what happens to her own body. Or do you say that the state or to doctors, often they've been men, some more recently women, are able to make that decision?
It's not her own body anymore, though, is it? Because
she's got a viable child.
She's providing a home to a viable child. But it's interesting because this has very much divided you at home. Dawn's written in, she says, I am pro-life, but I am pleased she is released. Judge was wrong to sentence her to imprisonment. Clearly there was something wrong requiring empathy and understanding. But does that change? Is that how the law should be applied in these circumstances? This woman had been pregnant 3 times before, I believe, so she knew that she was pregnant, she knew how it goes. I'm assuming because we saw that evidence was that she'd been looking this up for a long time online, seeing what the law is, seeing how to get these abortion pills late term. So she didn't know what she was doing. But again, a lot has been made of the fact that this happened during lockdown when perhaps things weren't as easy as they should have been and she didn't have enough support there. It's a complicated one. Please do keep your views coming in. But coming up, as the BBC Director General is grilled in Parliament today, some 500,000 people are opting out of paying the BBC licence fee. Well, 500,000 more anyway. Is this the end of the road for the corporation?
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Thank you for emailing in about this abortion case. Ben has said, he says, this woman committed murder plain and simple. She knew she had passed her time for termination and the baby could not fight her decision. I agree there may well have been mental issues at play here, but do we as a nation condone this behaviour? But Derek takes a different view. Derek, you say she should never have been sent to prison. A shorter suspended sentence was always the correct one. Another example of lockdown insanity, no doubt. We will be living with this forever. The judge clearly had his or her own religious and moral bias too. And there is the divide there playing out in my inbox. That's how the debate goes on this one. It's very, very difficult, very controversial, but you know where I stand by now. But anyway, moving on. The BBC Director General, Tim Davie, has been grilled today by the Parliamentary Committee over the broadcaster's leadership. It comes as the BBC's annual report published last week revealed that the number of people opting to buy a licence fee had fallen by 500,000, which is really quite significant. Could this be game over for the BBC? Alan, BBC having a bit of a tough ride at the moment. Lots going on, of course, lots of questions to be answered about how they dealt with the allegations against Hugh Edwards, one of their top presenters. We've also got 500,000 fewer people opting to pay the licence. Do you think there's just going to be a natural drift away from the BBC and therefore less money and therefore it just has to, you know, adapt and cut some of its programming even more so?
Well, I think
slow death.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think that a few things. I think that there was a time, and I've been a big fan of some of the parts of the BBC, and that we've trained brilliant technicians and they've gone around the world after working many years here, the art department, some of the history stuff. I think the problem now is that the BBC in many areas has become so ideological that the idea that it can be a broadcaster for the nation, for everyone, is riven with problems. We've seen it during COVID and the lockdowns. We've seen a very partisan approach. We've seen it more recently, even with things like protests against ULEZ, where the BBC were calling people far right and just throwing smears out. And I think that we've seen it around the discussion around the climate, which is not an objective, calm, reasonable one, but it's one that's very partisan and positioned. So particularly in that context.
Do you think the recent coverage of the weather in Europe has been...
It's been outrageous, and it's got the behavioural insights team working with others like Sky and the BBC to catastrophise the weather and to induce fear, to reinforce net zero. And so I think the thing is that many young people are now consuming media in very different ways, as we know. We know that the pay subscription model works, and I think there's a very compelling argument now to say, let's put it to the people, and many would not want to do it, and frankly, you've got to be able to perform in a world... They're doing it partly already internationally, but they have the benefit of being subsidised by the British public. So I'd say, yeah, many people... I'd put it to the people. I think the argument that the vote now would go not to continue.
Do you think just the idea of a state publicly funded broadcaster
it's quite odd, isn't
just a bit antiquated?
It is a bit... It's quite odd in a modern democracy that you have a state-funded broadcaster. And I think that's the heart of the issue here. When the BBC was first established, there was a real need for it. You know, technology was nascent. It needed support. You needed a government hand up to get anyone to broadcast. But I've got a very simple approach. You know, we can debate about the biases of the BBC, its inability to control its members of staff and so on. But my approach is very simple. Would we miss the BBC if it ceased to exist tomorrow? And I don't think we would. We wouldn't blink. We'd just go on and we'd watch Sky, or if that's your disposition, or GBNews, or any one of the other many channels available for news and entertainment. And so I can't make a case for establishing a state broadcaster funded by the people on an obligatory basis. And I would abolish this fee instantly. It's $2.5 billion a year, roughly.
It was last week or the week before. Things happened so quickly. We saw the list of the highest paid presenters. Gary Lineker, of course, topping the list with over 1,100,000, something like that a year. I mean, surely for Gary, it's a privilege to work from the BBC. You should turn down such a massive offer, such a massive salary. It is crazy that we are paying this much for talent and, you know, for the entirety of the thing. It really is very bureaucratic as well. They have, for a show like this, let's say they would have a lot more staff.
Yeah. Indeed, and also one of the big problems is that, I mean, Gary could get much more if he went in the commercial world, and I'd say make it commercial. In the past, the BBC has also underwritten. It is an important point about diligence, though, journalistic standards and investigative reporting, because they've had the money and the time to invest historically in the 70s, 80s and some of the 90s in factual, in rigorous journalistic standards of investigating really tricky issues over a long period of time, which has got to... Now, in the rush to have celebrity elements and in the rush to go away from that and have immediacy and have reality TV, they have become a victim of their own situation. I can't see the purpose for it as it...
I think that's absolutely right. And Richard says, I don't want to pay the likes of Mr Lineker's salaries. No way. Or the Director General. Strong stuff there from Richard. Keep watching GB News. Alan says, if the BBC wishes to save money, it should stop spending millions to cover live sport. And Leslie says, I think it's the fact that the presenters are receiving obscene amounts of money for a few hours of work. Well, there we go. Strong views from you, as always, at home. This has been a fantastic show. Thank you to my wonderful panel, Ben Habib and Alan Miller. We've covered everything from illegal migration to legal migration to counter-terrorism and to the BBC, of course, and that abortion case. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Michelle Dewbs will be back soon, but for now, it is Nigel Farage.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's been a damp day once again across many central areas. The rain, though, does ease overnight with clear spells emerging, but there will be further showers arriving on Wednesday. We've had a feature move through during Tuesday. That's pulling away into the North Sea at the moment and taking